processors at Visa, Stacy Tappan.
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Stacy Tappan, and I'm with Visa. And I am thrilled to introduce our next speaker to the main stage here at ETA for a very important and timely discussion on the agentic economy and how trust, accountability, and consent are going to survive when humans are no longer driving the transactions. So please join me in welcoming my friend, Vicky Bindra, the CEO of Trulio, to the stage. Thanks.
So thank you, Stacy, for introducing me, and thank you for all of you on being an audience to agentic commerce, which always is a difficult topic for me because a lot has been spoken about agentic commerce starting from April last year, and people are still waiting for the magic to happen in agentic commerce. So I'll start with a couple of disclaimers. What I'll talk today about is agentic commerce for consumers, not B2B. And the reason I'm excluding B2B is because B2B is a function typically where you would have the purchase decision different from the payment decision. Usually a lot of the purchases are done sort of on account or payment is done later. What I'm going to talk to you about is building trust when you're doing both the discovery and the choice of good and the payment together, and why does it require trust, and therefore who'll be either the winner or loser in this game. So that's my attempt today over the course of next 20 minutes, and hopefully it'll give you another point of view. Hopefully you'll agree, and if you don't agree, I'm still around, so happy to discuss and enrich myself with options that we're perhaps not looking at it as clearly as we should, right? So I'll start by talking about agentic commerce and where is it today, right? Arvind, thank you for coming. Good to see you. So if you look at in early 2026, it's about 30 days old, the data, and already the data is actually pretty old, right? So if you think about retailers, of course retailers want agentic commerce with two caveats, right? It will hopefully increase my revenue. Actually, I know it will increase my revenue, but it's the increase at a detriment to losses, and I want to be careful on how I think about losses in these transactions, right? So that's what every retailer tells us, and we do tons and tons of research, and either they're worried that they don't have the right systems, or they're worried that it's going to be so complicated with agents, despite whatever system they have, whether it's a good MCP server or whether they have detection agents, do you really get to agents or not? And then there's another issue of liability shift that I will come to in a short while, right? Then you look at consumers. So consumers, the large number of consumers, by the way, the number of 24% has gone up literally to double its number within a month. Within a month, where customers feel very comfortable using an agent to do discovery. So I'll stop there. It's at discovery. It's not for payment yet, right? And then, therefore, the analysts are all talking about how between 20 and 30% of all transactions over the next 4 years will all be done by agents. That's the state of the discussion today. The reality today is that less than 1% of the consumers are doing discovery with an intent to purchase. So a lot more are doing discovery, but the discovery with an intent to purchase is less than 1%. Therefore, the number of transactions are negligible, right? That's the reality today. Why is it so? Why shouldn't it be much more, given that we've gotten this hype for the last year? Let's look at momentum, right? The protocol momentum is very strong. Between Google and between OpenAI and between MasterCard, Visa, all are showing protocols either to the behavior of agents or protocols in terms of how it needs to be identified, intent needs to be captured, and payment needs to flow. So that part, I would say check, happening quite all right. The spotlight is a lot on the AI platforms, right? So everything is about Gemini and ChatGPT today in terms, because today they're the only people giving you real access to some information on how agentic commerce might work and how you might be able to discover through those big tech platforms. The whole focus is on assisted checkout experiences, be it on a Walmart site where a shopper can help you, and then there's a whole conversational discovery too. That's the spotlight today. Reality still is today, given some of the issues between issuers and acquirers and merchants and liability shift that I'll come to in a moment, the human still needs to confirm transactions, so the volume is extremely low. And some platforms like eBay and Amazon are just blocking all transactions. They're saying it's too early. We just don't want to take the risk. Our margins are so thin that it's not worth the incremental revenue for us to risk at this point in time. And consumers are perfectly fine today going back and using their card rather than using an agent. Right? So that's where we have a state of play currently. Now let's step back a little bit and say, what are the three or four things that are really different between what we'd call our traditional commerce or e-commerce and agentic commerce? I'll start with shift in liability. So today, in regular e-commerce, as long as the merchant uses the right EMV-coded card to do the transaction and follows all the rules, if a fraud happens in the process, the loss goes back to the issuer. That is not the case with agents. The issuers have not given permission to the acquirers and merchants to be able to charge back the transactions because they're trying to figure out how do we monitor agentic transactions coming back in a way that we can maintain risk exactly the same way that we did before. This is one of the big bottlenecks in terms of getting this party started. Second is intent capture. So everybody talks about air tickets. I'm sure all of you book air tickets. When you go to your website, you probably run through 50 permutations in your head. I actually want the front aisle seat. I don't mind the aisle seat on the emergency exit row or the row next to it. But if I get the middle last row, I need it at $200 less than a regular price ticket. Now think of putting that in 2 lines of code. Extremely hard. Right? So intent capture is actually more complicated than you think, and actually easier for hotels or car rentals than it is for airlines, easier for defined goods like a pair of shoes or subscriptions, because there's a definite element of the product you want to get to as opposed to air ticket or a fashion good that can have a lot of variances around it, right? So that's the second issue, is how do you capture intent properly? And we'll have the first generation of intent capture that's in our 2 line of code, and then a second generation of intent capture will be behavioral intent capture, where I'll have access, for example, to all of the bookings you made from your travel platform on your app that I can capture, and I can actually create an algorithm that will do it 99% right for you. But that is, I would say, phase 2 of intent capture. Phase 1 is 2 lines of code. How do I capture the intent? Third is confirmation criteria. At what time do I go back to the consumer to get the okay? Right? Is it based on dollar? Is it based on type of good? It's based on where I'm shopping from, an international site versus a local site. And that's the third complication. In e-commerce, you didn't have an issue. You went, you purchased, and the transaction was approved. Fourth is bots versus agents. How do merchants understand quite clearly what is a bot versus an agent? So if you really think about agentic commerce, these are the 4 blockers. You know, everything else we talk about, protocols and trying to confirm the identity of the consumer to the agent, those are easier problems to solve. But these 4 things we need to solve before the party really gets started in agentic commerce. Then you go back to it, who'll own the agentic experience? If I read the press today, it seems OpenAI will own it. Maybe Anthropic some, and maybe some with Gemini. Is that the real answer? Don't know. That also sort of, you make a leap of faith when you say that is, one, an average consumer in Alabama or Kentucky is very comfortable going to OpenAI, opening an account, putting their credentials of payment and letting an agent do a transaction. Is that real? I don't know. Right? Second is acquirers. Acquirers are logical people who have access to several merchants, but they have no resonance with consumers. Do you know the name of 4 acquirers you're dealing with, the merchants of choice? Probably don't. You may know Stripe because they just make a lot of noise, but that also most people won't know which merchant is with Stripe. Right? Third is the issuer. Complicated one. So the issuer has your money, has a trust, maybe lazy trust, but there is some trust with the issuer. But you really go to an issuer for shopping. Now, some will argue, yes, in Chase and Capital One we do, because they've got such a good merchant reward system and a merchant sort of, or your purchase stuff that you go more there than you go to an average shopping site. So is that on its course to change? Will there be 5 banks that will define it, or will it be 50 banks who will do it? Don't know. But if you think of all 3, there's no clear winner yet. But I think saying that one of them will be is more of a question mark than reality, right? So we may go back and look at some examples of, what has happened in the industry. So we looked at Venmo versus Zelle. Right? So this graph starts from 2018, but if you looked at 2015, Zelle was actually smaller than Venmo, right? And slowly Zelle has become far bigger. Now there are 2-3 reasons for it. One reason was that, particularly if you wanted instant payment through Venmo, you had to pay a 1.75% fee, sort of, which you didn't have to pay in Zelle. But more importantly, it was also, people are comfortable doing their after dinner, like splitting of bill, but if they wanted to send money for something else, they'd rather do it through a banking system that they knew they could call on if something went wrong. It shows up with the average amount that you use Venmo for. It's 58 versus 278. That's a huge difference in terms of the confidence you have in a particular engine to do a transaction or not. And by the way, the UI UX of Venmo was far superior. Now, don't get me wrong. Venmo is growing very nicely during this period, too. It is just that the separation of the 2 platforms is quite distinctive, right? And that sort of shows you, how a banking system can create trust, particularly when there is some risk with where the result or the outcome can happen. Is agentic commerce the same? Maybe, right? Unclear, but maybe. So now we go on to say, okay, if you look at sort of, for the trust, how do they extend their boundary? What do they do today? So today they authenticate the customer, so they authenticate you when you want to do a transaction. They authorize the transaction when it comes back from the acquirer and merchant, and they handle all the disputes and outcomes. That's what they do today. What do they really need to extend for agentic commerce? One, they need to verify the agent, which means if you bring along an agent of OpenAI, they need to basically say, yes, I'm okay with that agent because I've controlled the parameters. Or they may issue agents themselves. So if you think about what Capital One and JP Morgan Chase are doing, they're going to come out very soon with their own agents, which will be Larry the travel agent, Joan the subscription agent, and so on and so forth. That will be on their portal for you to use. Right? Will that be, so is that something they would do? Second is issue and manage permissions. It's not that much of a lift from where they are today. Now, does the customer automatically think for shopping they'll go to a bank? Don't know. But from a capability perspective, in terms of just changing the way they're doing business, the banks actually have the least to do. Will they be successful? I think time will tell, but if a bank now following that logic before the transaction, they need to do agent onboarding. Absolutely. So either it's their own agent, or if you bring along an agent, they have to verify not just the agent, which is the line of code and hallucination, but also the agent developer. So they need to make sure that the agent developer is credible, because it's no longer going to be these top 4 technical giants who are going to be developing agents. You're going to have hundreds and millions of companies and small groups are going to be developing agents. So you've got to register and trust. Second is you've got to have a good monitoring process, which means you can then audit track an agent from the time of inception, from when it locks into a consumer, from the time it does the trade, and from the time you go back and you say that the credit has been received in for the merchant. Right? Then after the transaction, you need a full replay, which is the biometric of the transaction is stored so that if there is a first-party chargeback or there's a third-party claim chargeback, you're able to follow the entire process and very quickly, automatically process the claim, approve or decline. So those are the things the bank needs to do. Now let's keep going further. An agent control center. Not that difficult to do. We just mocked up and lovable an agent control center for a bank. Sorry, I don't expect you to read it. I apologize, it's small. It is basically, we just took it from our sort of, app to put it. But we just figured if a bank really wants to do it, it's not that hard to do. You can have for every agent or by customer or a combination of the two, create a full workflow that actually tells you what they are, and if there are more bads than goods in terms of either it has hallucinated or it's not completed a transaction, you then basically, you suspend the agent or you block the agent from working further, which is the example here. That's one part of it, right? So it's actually relatively, I won't say relatively easy. It's in the workflow of a banking system that they would need to create if they really want to do this. Second is really, as you think about is what is a dispute workspace. This we think it's even easier because now everything is electronic. Once the agent is combined, everything else you can actually audit and you can create the biometrics completely 100% to know that there is a problem. So the problem will only be in the identity upfront piece. After the identity upfront, we assume that it wasn't an account takeover. It's actually really easy to define a dispute parameter and to say who owns the chargeback and why. Right? So if there's any banker here, I'm hoping you're taking note to see where the opportunity lies. And for the others who are partners of banks, how you can partner with the banks to do something credible in this space. So then we stepped back and we said, what are the critical questions? Right? For the consumer, it is, how safe is it? Is it safe for me to go to an acquirer? Is it safe for me to go to Gemini or ChatGPT? Or is it really only safe for me to go to a bank because my money's there, I know they'll make it back, they'll give me back if something goes wrong? Second is, where do I go for shopping? Do I really think of my bank as a place to shop? Or is the world changing that actually might be okay for the near term for me to do? So that's the consumer question that they have in their head. From a merchant's, but by the I've made it a simple question. We've done very detailed sort of, both in-person and detailed electronic surveys to understand all of the issues the customers are looking at today. And this is across America. This is not the East Coast, West Coast answer for you, right? Which are all people who sort of understand the space a little bit more. Second thing for merchants is, how do I increase revenue while being careful of fraud? This is what we discussed earlier. But the second part for merchants is, how do I stack my products in a way that the agents can discover it clearly? Which means that there is a certain element of how they write the price, how they write the quality, how that can be engineered and seen by the agent very clearly, agent coming into the site, and the agent can do comparison. Because the large part of success of an agent is if they can do price comparison and close the transaction. Right? That's part which merchants really worry about today. Now think about acquirers. I think acquirers, the question they're asking, what is our role? Do we generate agents? If we generate agents, would people come? Now, I think what we didn't cover today was B2B. I think acquirers have a huge part to play in the B2B side of it, where they should say, we will take the front and center in terms of developing the agents and developing processes for agentic commerce. But in today's context, I think the role is limited. The role is more around helping their merchants be completely safe and ensure that they are able to accept agentic transactions. And one way to do it is do smart hosted pages for your merchants. It has double benefit. It keeps your merchants safe. More importantly, they're not going to leave you. They don't have another platform to go to if they're on your hosted page. So that's my answer to acquirers of how they should do it. From issuer opportunity, this is what we've spoken about. Is this an opportunity or a threat? Right? I was talking to one of the large regional banks, and they said, oh, but we just don't have the capability to do it. I said, it's an opportunity. They said, yeah, we see it could be an opportunity, but it's hard for us. Will they break the barrier? I can easily say Capital One and JP Morgan Chase, yes, they will do it. The others, don't know. I think they have internal systems and internal people to also worry about whether they make the leap and change or not. Is this an opportunity? Yes. Of course, notwithstanding the fact that the consumer intent on coming to a website is not clear. So I had an alternative. I said, why don't you create an agentic card? I said, create an agentic card as an issuer and send it to your customers. That same customer, when they issue an agentic card, they don't come to your website now. They just go to Quick Wallet from where they can take an agent and go and do transactions. So if you put your mind to it, there are ways to do it that makes it consumer friendly, and consumer just sees that as a part to go shopping, as a part to going back to your own website and portal. But these are the questions that I think the issuers need to do. But listen, can they win? I think they absolutely can. Will they win? Don't know. Right? I'll ask each one of you to think as you leave this meeting to think, who are really the winners? And I think the answer is not clear. It's tilted in favor of the issuers for today, because that's where the money is, that's where the confidence is, that's where the fear is from a consumer standpoint, but there's a lot to cover for them to be really successful. I really want to thank you. I hope it gives you some food for thought, and I'm around soon after this. If you have any questions, happy to answer. But thanks a lot, and have a great afternoon.
What a great morning of education we've had. Let's give a warm thank you to all our morning keynote speakers. Don't miss the Lunch and Learn sessions and then more curated content on the track stages. Then make sure to come back for our headline keynote right here on the main stage, sponsored by Visa at 3:30 p.m.